Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zappo.
Hello and namaste. As always, friends, thanks for joining me. I am your eccentric, but always authentic, unscripted, probably a little bit biased, but hey, I own up to it. Host of this ridiculous podcast. I gotta admit to you, friends, it's 12 noon. On a Tuesday, August 18th, and I have to admit to you that I have struggle bust all morning with what to do an episode about today. Maybe it's the heat wave, because yes, indeed, there is a redonkulous heat wave currently. What do you call it when a heat wave rolls through your part of the world? I guess rolling through. But anyways, I digress. Maybe it's the heat wave. Maybe it's the ongoing madness that is all of this 2020-ness. Maybe it's my yet to be fully tamed sleep schedule. I did wake up pretty early this morning. I felt good about that. But then when I sat down to be like, let's do a podcast, I just, didn't know. There's so much to talk about. Let's start with this. Let's focus on what we can tangibly get at right away. There's 11 weeks left. 11 weeks. Some talking head, at some point over the last 48 hours of coverage that I've skimmed through and or checked in on to see what's going on in the political world of words on television, said something to the effect of Trump probably coming in hot and with the wild and crazy for the next several weeks. And I'm paraphrasing severely. And I did not jot down the person, so I don't have a name or a reference. I apologize. I was probably just about to call it a night because I think this was late last night at the end of the night. And he said, expect something to the lines of, expect Trump to pull an October surprise in October and in sometime in August and September and November. Something to that effect. And I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine if he went to the extent of a weekly October surprise? It's 11 weeks of political October surprises. That killed me, and that might have left a sour bitterness in me, because I definitely woke up ugh. But my own emotional state is not the core theme of the show. This is not a personal biography audio blog. This is a public discourse audio podcast, talk show host show about what's going on in the world. Did you watch the kickoff, not the inaugural, the kickoff, the first of 4 Democratic National Convention shows? I tried to, and I will be honest with you folks, I was exhausted and tired, and I kind of snoozed off on the couch. But I recorded it, so if worse comes to worse, I can try and make myself watch the bits that I missed. But I did wake up in time to catch the end of Mrs. Obama's speech. I think, I woke up somewhere in the middle of it. I woke up in time definitely to hear the part. I don't remember where I woke up in it, but I woke up in the middle of it. And then since then, they've played the bit, so now I can't really honestly tell you that I saw it live. But they've played the bit where she talks about going high or going low. And that resonates deeply. If you set aside all the reasons two people might argue about Michelle Obama, which is a ridiculous thing to me, and probably part of some sort of PSYOP campaign, but if you set all of those ridiculous things aside and just focus on the fact that as a public figure, she went out of her way to make a statement about that, to make a statement encouraging folks to resist the primal urge to lower themselves to the depths of those that they despise, right? That we, why are we despising each other, first of all? She didn't use the word despise. I threw that in, but you get my point. That resonated deeply with me and still does, and it's because I think previously on my own show have encouraged folks to contemplate that, quite honestly, if we lean in too far to the us versus them dynamic in a letting it take over our lives kind of way, and we take it seriously and we live in opposition to one another, to what depths will we lower ourselves and each other? It's a sad sort of slippery slope of spiraling out of control. And, dare I say it, becoming the evil that we oppose. I don't know to what extent she herself would have taken the analogy, but I would connect, if I had been that speechwriter, or if I had been if I had been in that room when she was, preparing to make this speech, I would have been like, take it to the thing about murdering murderers, becoming murderers ourselves. Like, is that what we want? Is that what we're going for? And it starts with becoming hypocrites and making hypocrites out of each other and out of ourselves. But I digress. So, I feel like as far as if this were my job, I feel like a failure because I straight up was like, oh, is that today? Shit. I'm already feeling like it's bedtime soon. I woke up way too early. And I did so again today. But since this is just a hobby show and not my actual, no one's paying me to do this, straight up Scouts honor, I swear. Whatever you want me to put my hand on, Bible, I'll do it because it's the truth. No one's paying me. The only one paying me to do this is yourselves, dear audience, with your support and your consideration and your, just lending me your ears, to borrow from Shakespeare a bit. So here we are, 11 weeks out. We've got the Democrats broaching uncharted territory with an all-digital production of what is usually a thronging, crowded public event in a massive arena stadium, right? Like, think about it. Quite an epic moment in history in its own silly, fun, goofy way that we will probably mock and laugh at not too far down the road, presuming all things get better eventually and not crazy worse. Knock on some wood on that one right there, right, folks? So that's happening. And whatever opinions one could express about the DNC, its operatives, its politicians, and its base, because remember, folks, I myself am not necessarily, quote, one of them. And in my future forward, only way out is in sort of worldview, my long game, my, long-term view is not necessarily about exclusively supporting them. But in this moment in time, if people were to ask my opinion as to who should get the decisive, like, landslide win, it should be at this point, for all flaws and critiques aside, and that outrages some people, I've noticed, and I understand. I'm threading a tricky needle in as much as that I think we're supposed to go through a pendulum swing of aha moments, right? Let the two-party system sort of shake itself. And I think we're supposed to do the grassroots movement upswell of unifying as a people to nominate more judiciously, more selectively. But that requires a lot of on-the-ground healing work, if I dare say. And that's not all going to happen between now and Election Day 2020. It's just not. And that's the catch-22, this horrible gap between a gap that we have of a problem. Like, we need deep reaching, far-reaching, deep sweeping. What's the right phrase? We need deep and far-reaching healing, literally at the species-wide level. Take a look. Pull your head out of whatever barrel you like to stick it in most of the time, and look around at all the other barrels. It's a mess. If that analogy makes sense to you, I hope it does. Right? So, reeling it back in, Mr. Zeppo, the DNC and its 4-day online, all-digital Zoom cam convention is quite an interesting, different, new thing. And I've been debating. I woke up this morning and literally thought I shouldn't even comment. I shouldn't even say a word. Because I'm sort of outside of their tent, right? Because I'm like, yay, I hope your guy wins. But also, we gotta, like, revolutionize, and I don't mean, like, in the bloody violent French Revolution kind of way, but revolutionize through healing everybody, all the parties, all the system. So I'm not necessarily supposed to be in their tent, but I will say this, having watched what I did watch as we roll through 12 p.m. Tuesday, August 18th, of yesterday's day one of their convention, they definitely were quite specific. All criticism aside, and there's plenty flowing, I'm sure, out there in the echo chamber of echo chambers that is our delightful media environment. Some of them perfectly valid, some of them absurd. But that's the gambit that you run when you let free speech get all polemic-y and echo chambery. I will applaud this. They concretely made a clear, tangible, easy to comprehend effort to state throughout in the way in which they presented all the chosen speakers and whatnot. Like, the overall package view is one of inclusion. It's like, we welcome diversity. There were Republicans there saying, come on over, you on-the-fence Republicans that just can't take this Trump nonsense anymore. Come on over. Our tent's big enough. Which is, for the historical moment that we're in, it's sort of a pretty good choice for them to make. Right? Conversely, to take the balanced scope of the whole landscape, we've got Trump, on the other hand, invoking some of his mysterious and probably mildly nefarious word magic. And I have talked about this on the show before, I do believe. And if I haven't, I apologize. I definitely made a series of memes about it way back, when he was just invoking things into like accepted parlance by chanting them like freaking mantra. And I want to take a minute and talk about that. But first, dear friends, I'll give your brain a little bit of a breather for a hot second here with the following little bit of ridiculousness for your listening pleasure. Trap City 3 Remix, Solo Trance by the imaginary DJ Zed. Indeedly do, friends. Thanks for enjoying that. Words matter, don't they? Right? Just like I wanted to take a moment to applaud the former First Lady for her choice in sharing an idea, a concept that should inspire people to lift themselves up out of their slippery slopes. What is a slippery slope? We can spend a day talking about that. But you get a sense of what I mean. An ego trap, a self-induced seduction into our worst impulses. We can indulge in that and let that take over our way of being, or we can lift ourselves up and choose a higher path, a higher road, a higher idea, a higher ideal, a higher, Conversely, I worry about some of the dangerous ways in which public figures seem to be invoking, either unconsciously or consciously, like what I would dare to say is a kind of hypnotic word magic. Trump's statement that the only way he can lose the 2020 election is if the election is rigged is a powerful bit of self-propping circular logic that radically requires sort of it requires the believer to just turn a blind eye to the fact that if it were to be true, it necessitates that Trump is aware and that it is rigged, that the system is rigged, and that he is a willing participant. And it's also like precisely the kind of thing that a nervous and maybe not quite so not so stable genius would say over and over again. It's a decidedly weird. It's like that painting that's a painting of a smoking pipe, and the caption that's painted under it is "This is not a pipe." You know, it's like the only way he can lose, and I don't even want to say it, right? Because the more you say it, the more it earworms into people's ears and gets repeated unconsciously. And if there is a truth to sort of harnessing of people's minds to project a desired outcome, which I don't think there isn't, right? I just don't know to what extent Trump is likely to be consciously doing that or unconsciously doing that, but he does believe in those laws of positivity and things like that. Self-described believer in positive thinking. If I may dare say that that's exactly the kind of thing you say when you have tried or are in the middle of attempting to rig the election and want to cast aspersions at all other possible, plausible suspects so as to not be suspected yourself. I don't know. It just sounds like something a villain in a movie would say. It's horrifying on a certain level. And I don't want to give it the kind of attention that would harness, would give it the kind of power to create the kind of chaos that it could create. But it is something that I think is worth having some public discourse about, because we shouldn't walk into some blind corner and get walloped in the face with, some Trumptopian reactionary chaos caused by his base having been seduced into believing that crazy statement must be true by the sheer fact that he said it a million times. Are the elections rigged? Plenty of people believe so. But ironically, plenty of his Trump base believed he's the first person to ever get away with not being part of the rigging, which, to me, makes categorically zero sense. If the elections are rigged, then the most obviously true thing, in my personal opinion, from my perspective, is that Trump is yet another willing participant. Whether he knew that it was 100% really a rigged thing in 2005, who knows? But by the time he was calling Hillary Clinton a puppet, and they had that delightful third grade level, no, you're a puppet. No, you're a puppet. No, you're a puppet moment, he must have been read into it, right? Like, and if the elections are not rigged, I'm not pretending to know either way, folks. I'm telling it to you straight. I have my inclination as to thinking how it works. And I think I thread a really weird, nuanced middle ground. And so people generally tend to assume that I'm just automatically whatever they prefer to argue with. And I'm usually not. So apologies to everybody who doesn't quite, to whom I give a weird representative statement to that doesn't quite make sense. What should the rest of all of us who do not think that the only way Trump might lose is if the election is rigged, who think it is possible to bring a show of force as a sort of opposition mandate vote of everyone rallying under this chosen other ticket. Set aside the fear-mongering, because fear-mongering, politically speaking, even in the most benign season, is exactly what it is. Fear-mongering, and not a fair interpretation or representation of what any other that other candidate that's being fear-mongered about might actually do. That's just how that shit works. No offense to anybody who's wrapped up in some fear-mongering. Because it is, let's pause and savor the simple and quite silly reality that the scary nightmare dystopian vision of a Biden world that Trump and the Trump campaign are peddling is already here and has come to fruition directly because of dear old Donnie and his whimsical way of mismanaging governance. There's a whole, we can do a whole special series on that, unpacking that ironic situation. And it's not all, nothing is exclusively 100% any one person's fault. As always, I'm a person of like cosmic fractal chaos nuance, right? Like there's 1,000,001 factors that brought us to this moment here. And there's a lot of ways we can analyze that and interpret it and slice it up and argue about it. And it's fascinating the choices that are being made. I wanted to say something earlier. What was it? Oh, right. Some cynics might say that it's not even worth the papers printed on to worry about what politicians say. And I just, I just made up that. I just pulled a Trump. Some people are saying I postulated a theoretical thing that I think might be reasonable for me to assume that others might reasonably be thinking. Maybe they're not. That's what Trump does. When I do it, I don't get millions of followers. I get people going, what the fuck are you talking about? When Trump does it, he gets millions of followers. I don't get it. Russian bots, anyone? I don't know. Maybe not. Who knows? I don't know for sure. I don't got time to investigate this shit. I'm not a Perry Mason style 2020 private eye, although I'd love to write that short story. Put a pin in that. Stories I'd like to write. We have a knockout, drag out fight a coming, according to the newly appointed Kamala Harris as VP select, which is fun. And okay, I wanted to come around full circle and say, like, if we're gonna pick bones or get nitpicky about things, the one thing I was like, oh man, y'all shouldn't have chosen to go with that sort of theme, and that's like, we got to support Biden like our life depends on it. I don't like that kind of talk. But I sit in a strange, nebulous place, politically speaking, that most people are like, what is he talking about? Speaking of which, I thought I would address some COVID-19 related developments. And by all means, friends, when you listen to my show, please, please, please do keep in mind that I am by no means in any way, shape, or form an expert in anything. Let me just throw this random self-deprecating disclaimer out. I'm just an underemployed. I refuse to call myself completely unemployed at this point because the pandemic will end and I will still have my delightful theater jobs that I used to love and miss very lovingly now. I'm just, I'm just a fellow 2020 shelter at home theater technician and artist with a general education in the world of politics and public discourse and civic responsibilities and whatnot, and sort of an interesting pseudo-philosophical take on how we could maybe change things up and do things differently. And sharing that by invoking my artistic, constitutionally protected free right speech to make satirical, lampooning, critical commentary performance art. So don't take me too seriously. Take it with a grain of salt. Feel free to laugh in my face at things you think are laughable in the face. But do know that I mean it deeply and sincerely when I say to you, friends, that whatever we do next, our capacity to collaborate with empathy for one another, regardless of all the us versus them manipulative programming that we've all endured, because no one escaped this onslaught of conditioning. It's baked into the soup. It's baked into the cake of society. The more we can endure and move forward and work and collaborate and develop and grassroots and all of that with compassion for one another and with forgiveness and with healing as priorities, as foundational priorities. In other words, work that must be happening as we do everything else. If we ignore that stuff, quite sincerely, friends, I worry that we'll just build ourselves into another slippery slope of repeating some gnarly history. And who needs that? So yeah, hang tight. I'm going to give your brain another little breather and hit play for you on Tropical Pop 101 Remix, Isla Mágica del Oro by DJ Zed, your imaginary DJ for this show, and his forthcoming imaginary album, New Epoch, Volume 2. Wasn't ready for you there, folks. Sorry for coughing in your ear holes like that. I think I hit the mute button in time to cover the worst of it. So, we're back. Hope you enjoyed that little number. Words and stuff and things and actions all colliding together in the chaos of real life. The last bit of stuff I want to talk about is a segment of the convention from last night that apparently I think I slept through because it was one of those surprise, whoa, that happened last night kind of revolutionary moments for me, revealing moments for me of like, oh man, I didn't really realize I'd really conked out. My body just like said, good night. But I'd been up since like too stupid early in the morning. But the DNC had, and I'm totally so not prepared. I meant to do that thing where on the music break, I got ready and I found, okay, great, thank you. I found that I needed to, that's not, how did I, what? Anyways, now I feel like an ass. Apologies to you, dear audience. The DNC brought on a woman whose name I now totally cannot remember, despite the fact that I just followed her on Twitter a hot minute ago, but there's been some update to Twitter, and now it's like, what? You did what? I don't remember. Show me? Who did you wear? So I can't read you her name and sound like I know what I'm talking about because it won't show it to me. But she spoke quite movingly and hauntingly and a little alarmingly about her father, who, for those of you who already know where this is going, apologize for mulling it over, who put his faith in President Trump and because of, here we go, I found her. Kristen Urquiza. Her father put his faith in President Trump during the early days of the beginning of this pandemic, right when he did his most amount of direct damage in logistical terms, calling it a hoax, walking it back and then walking it forward and walking it back again, playing with the hoax, continuing to, blah, 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 refusing to wear a mask for however long he refused to wear, all the litany of things. You've heard it, you've seen it, you were there for it. You're either in denial of it having an impact or it being meaningful or even being real, or you understand. And so, tragically, her father got sick, got hospitalized, and ultimately passed away. And this has been happening more and more. People of a certain perspective and political persuasion who were, for whatever complex reasons they decided to be, over public discourse, publicly self-proclaimed COVID-19 deniers, have subsequently gotten sick and gotten hospitalized or worse. And increasingly, many more are making and posting personal testimonials. And one has to wonder, how many of those testimonials will it take for anybody and everybody else, for whatever their reasons are, that think this is fake or worse, right? Like, there's those who think, oh, it's a real disease, but it's super mild. It's nothing to worry about. It's like the flu. I'll be fine. If my grandmother gets sick, she'll be fine. And then those who literally insist that it does not exist, that it's a lie, and that, the full spectrum of variation and nuance you can think of is being expressed. And it's a trip. It's wild because it amazes me how many people don't reconcile all the different flavors of the denial rationale, and don't realize that that's like a smorgasbord of too much denial content that sort of gets a little out of control. But anyways, it was weird and powerful. And of course, the detractors, those who argue or who have been sticking to the idea that this has always been some kind of democratic hoax, will just deny and say that Miss Urquiza is a crisis actor, etc. But she's out there in the interwebs, and she's easy to find now because of her video presentation at the Democratic Convention, which, by the way, is worth watching. If you know somebody that's on the fence, that's a COVID denier, that maybe sort of is starting to wonder if maybe they shouldn't be a COVID denier, pass it along, because it might help. And for those who are curious, I am of the opinion that indeed Mother Nature is more than fully capable of giving birth to various forms of living things that are going to be a threat to our life. And that, yes, of course there's a psyop going on top of that. But that psyop isn't only, it's a hoax, it's just about sheepling you into X, Y, and Z. No, there's a disease, and people are sick, and people are, suffering long-term impacts for surviving it, etc. And there's a growing mountain of real, it's just out there, it's their social media, it isn't a production coming out of Hollywood, it isn't a million hired crisis. There's no, it's too big. And the worst part, okay, I'll admit to you, friends, I have sometimes woken up in the middle of the night and had the feverish thought, what if I'm totally dead wrong? And it's absolutely 100% totally fake and a hoax. Then we've got nothing to worry about. And every time people create the conditions for a super spreader event, there shouldn't be a super spreader event. And yet there is. And if it's a totally hoax, the numbers would be either more terrifying and fake and more easily, eventually, provable as fake. But I think they would be aggressively more terrifying, right? Like, why? I sit back and I listen to the echo chamber of echo chambers of argumentation about COVID-19 and all the many shades of purple. Oh, I'm so mad that purple got used because I love chakra purple, and it's kind of a darker purple that they use, but that's a whole meaningless tangent. But I'm just annoyed that they use it a lot to relate to COVID, because now it's like a little bit too closely associated to my own brand, which I'd want to use, as you may know, I've noticed sometimes, a purple and green combo. But that's meaningless here. If you look at the whole 50 Shades of Purple of narratives explaining, quote, often claiming to have the, quote, absolute truth about what COVID-19 really is, versus the singular, organic narrative, Mother Earth gave birth to it by all the mechanisms that Mother Earth causes these things to happen, just like how Mother Earth, the living, multi-dimensional, multi-fractal sentient being that is a womb for all of life and is the source that originates all the requirements for life additionally, including climate or weather or whatever you want to call it. She's fully capable of creating things that will destroy us. She created us. So it's a bit silly to me when people insist, 44444, when people insist that it's got to be some other unnatural narrative that especially when they're weak, or they're littered with all kinds of evidence of linguistic programming, us versus them, ideological content, and the sort of general stamp of like, this is mass produced with variables inserted in order to create a cacophony of conflicting. No one cares. They've all got their different reasons, but they're all convinced by this particular reason. And if everyone else is close but a little off, they'll figure out which one's the true eventually, right? Whenever there's a chorus of arguing voices, each claiming to have the absolute truth and denying in an us versus them, we will destroy you kind of way that all else could not possibly have the absolute truth, I get a little suspicious. What do you want from me? Especially if it all stands in opposition to Mother Nature and her capacity, her quite organic and innate and very real capacity to give birth to all kinds of forms of life, including little tiny ones that some would deign to say aren't alive, but I would argue if they're able to interact with our DNA and utilize our cells for specifically the purposes of reproducing themselves, then they're doing the fundamental activity of life, which is consuming other life in order to ensure our reproduction. That's at the rawest blood and bone, ambulatory meat sack, embodied, whatever you want to call it, level of complex organic behavioral action. That's what life is. And that's what a virus is doing. So I could be wrong. I hear you guys out there, whoever you are, if you're one of them and you're listening to the show, I've given it a whirl. The whole, it's funny, they always, pick germ theory. Germ theory doesn't exist, therefore viruses are fake. How come, what about virus theory? Why are you just slamming germ theory? Science is always flawed. And we can go on a whole spiral out of control about science. We'll put a pin in that. We'll talk about that in a future episode. Because I hear a lot of science bashing. And you know what? Yeah, there's a lot of criticism to be made, just like with politics, just like with organized religion. They've all been hijacked. They've all been redirected in their purpose. And dare I say it, dear friends, so has the conspiracy theory content. So what do you trust? What rabbit hole do you dare go down? I propose to you, dear friends, and I'll leave you with this thought. I think I've dropped this on you before, but check it out one more time. Out of all the myriad of possible rabbit holes you have come across, or you can imagine coming across, out there in the world of stuff and information, the only rabbit hole that is really, truly worth your time and effort and commitment to exercising a relationship with and exploring how to get into and deep down and through it is the one in the middle of your own skull. That'll do it for me today. This quote morning on Good Morning Trumptopia, special presentation of 2020 election countdown madness. 11 weeks, folks. Buckle yourselves in, brace yourselves tight. It's gonna get crazy. And stand up for the things that really count. You can argue about masks. You can argue about COVID-19. Go and expose yourself, get yourself or someone else around you sick to prove the point. Or you can get busy about your work that you are being called to do by Mother Nature, which is to know thyself and heal thyself. Figure out how to embody that Christos that Yeshua kept talking about. Far be it for me to tell you what to do. I'm just throwing the seeds out there to see if they stick in that fertile soil that is your mind. I'm not asking you to believe what I say. I'm encouraging you to investigate it for yourself. Until next time, I have been your fictitious podcast, talk show, radio host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, along here with my mostly silent and imaginary DJ sidekick, DJ Zed. Peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart.